With the Beatles, we were playing a place in Brighton. I think it was when we were on the bill with the Kinks. The Kinks did the first half and we did the second. In the interval of the show, there was like a palm reader. There's a lot of it about there, you know.
Mary McCartney has dedicated years to documenting her father, Paul McCartney, through her camera, but nothing prepared her for his quiet exit from the stage, possibly for the last time. In a rare moment, she shares what it really means to say goodbye. But we can't help but wonder, why is the music legend finally stepping back from his one true love? Let's find out. Background on Mary McCartney. Mary McCartney was born on August 28, 1969, at the Avenue Clinic in the serene St. John's Wood area of London. Her roots are steeped in creativity and fame. She's the daughter of American photographer Linda Eastman and legendary English musician Paul McCartney of the Beatles. Growing up in a unique family, Mary is the younger maternal half-sister of Heather McCartney, older sister to celebrated fashion designer Stella McCartney, and musician James McCartney, and older paternal half-sister to Beatrice McCartney. From an early age, Mary's upbringing was anything but ordinary. Her parents were passionate vegetarian activists, and they raised all their children with those same values. That lifestyle became a cornerstone of the McCartney household, and later inspired the launch of Meat-Free Mondays in 2009, a family-led campaign encouraging people in the UK to go meatless one day a week for the planet. Mary's passion for photography took center stage in 2015 when she was chosen to photograph Queen Elizabeth II. The occasion was to commemorate the Queen becoming the longest reigning British monarch in over 1,000 years, a historic milestone that Mary captured with both grace and legacy in mind. Her love for music history, no doubt shaped by her famous father, found a new outlet in 2021. It was announced that Mary would direct a documentary about the iconic Abbey Road studios. Reflecting on her early memories of the studio, she shared, "Some of my earliest memories as a young child come from time spent at Abbey Road." The film, titled "If These Walls Could Sing," became the centerpiece of Abbey Road's 90th anniversary celebration in November 2022. With interviews from music legends like Jimmy Page, Kate Bush, Elton John, and Pink Floyd, Mary set out to explore not just what the studio meant to them, but how deeply they truly cared about it. And as she hoped, the result revealed a deep, personal reverence. But Mary's creativity extends well beyond the lens. She's also carved out a name in the world of plant-based cuisine. In 2012, she released Food Vegetarian Home Cooking, followed by At My Table, Vegetarian Feasts for Family and Friends in 2015, both filled with flavorful dishes rooted in her family's culinary philosophy. In 2023, she added another hit to her list with Feeding Creativity, a cookbook featuring 60 plant-based recipes made for celebrity friends, blending food with artistry in every dish. The family legacy also lives on through Linda McCartney's Family Kitchen, a 2021 cookbook co-authored with Paul and Stella. The book reimagines 90 of Linda's beloved vegetarian recipes for a new generation and earned a nomination for an IVFF award the same year, a fitting tribute to their mother's pioneering spirit in food activism. Mary's culinary creativity found a new stage with Mary McCartney Serves It Up, a vibrant plant-based cooking show that premiered on Discovery Plus and Food Network in early 2021. The show's warm personal tone, along with star-studded guests, made it a hit, returning for a second season in November 2021 and a third in November 2022. It even snagged a Daytime Emmy nomination in 2022, proving that her charm translates just as well on screen as it does on the page. Away from the spotlight, Mary has also navigated her personal life with poise. She married filmmaker Alistair Donald in 1998, and together they had 2 sons before parting ways in 2007. She later found love again, marrying director Simon Aboud in 2010, with whom she also has 2 sons. But to understand Mary's story fully, we have to go back to where it all began, with the man who unknowingly shaped her lens and legacy, Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney's humble beginnings. Long before he filled stadiums and changed the sound of modern music, James Paul McCartney was born into a modest working-class family on June 18, 1942, at Walton Hospital in Liverpool. It was more than just Paul's birthplace. It was also where his mother, Mary Patricia McCartney, had trained and worked as a nurse. With both parents of Irish descent, Paul's roots were steeped in rich cultural heritage. At home, the McCartney family were a blended mix of personalities and stories. Paul grew up alongside his younger brother, Peter Michael, and later gained a stepsister, Ruth, from his father Jim's second marriage. Although Paul and his brother were baptized Catholic, religion didn't carry much weight in the household, especially since their father, once a Protestant, had stepped away from faith entirely, becoming agnostic. In the McCartney home, belief was never pushed. Instead, what mattered more was hard work and holding the family together. Paul's father, Jim McCartney, was no stranger to perseverance. Before the war, Jim had worked his way up from a humble sample boy to a salesman at a cotton merchant firm, A. Haney & Company. But when war hit, so did uncertainty. Haney's closed its doors, and Jim found himself taking up a new role as a lathe turner at Napier's defense engineering plant. By night, he donned a different uniform, serving voluntarily in the fire brigade. It was a life of sacrifice and double shifts, yet the family pushed forward. In 1944, they moved into a flat in Knowsley, and 2 years later into a council estate in Speke. After the war, Jim returned to cotton work with a reduced income, while Mary's job as a visiting midwife became the financial backbone of the family, a rare and empowering role for a woman at the time. By the age of 5, Paul was enrolled at Stockton Wood Road Primary School in Speke, but due to overcrowding, he soon transferred to Joseph Williams Jr. School in Belle Vale in 1949. Even then, Paul stood out. In 1953, he aced the highly competitive 11+ exam. He was one of only 3 students out of 90 to pass, earning himself a spot at the prestigious Liverpool Institute. It was a major shift. This grammar school education put Paul on a different path than most working-class kids his age, and then came the bus ride that would change music history. In 1954, Paul met a quiet, guitar-loving boy named George Harrison. They both commuted from Speke, and despite being a year apart in age, a friendship quickly started. Paul would later admit that he tended to talk down to him at first, but that unlikely pairing would soon become one of rock and roll's most legendary duos. Slowly, Mary not only just became the glue that held the family together, she was their anchor. Her work as a midwife didn't just bring babies into the world, it brought stability to the McCartneys. Her earnings allowed the family to move into a modest but comfortable home at 24th Lynn Road in Allerton, a step up from their earlier post-war struggles. Mary was known for her dedication, often cycling through snow-covered streets in the dead of night to visit patients. Paul once recalled waking up at 3 a.m. to see her disappear into the icy dark. That image would linger in his memory for life. But tragedy struck early. On October 31, 1956, when Paul was just 14 years old, his world came crashing down. His mother died suddenly of an embolism following surgery for breast cancer. Her absence left a hole that would never fully close. Years later, Paul would find a deep emotional bond with John Lennon, who had also lost his mother Julia in a tragic accident when he was 17. Paul eventually started finding an outlet with music. His father, Jim McCartney, a former jazz band leader in the 1920s, brought music into the house as a daily ritual. Jim played trumpet and piano and always had a tune rolling through the house. He pushed Paul and his brother toward music, even giving Paul piano lessons, though Paul, ever the rebel, preferred learning by ear. At 11, he auditioned for the Liverpool Cathedral Choir, but didn't make it. Instead, Paul joined the local choir at St. Barnabas's Church. Not exactly a rock stage, but it was a start. For his 14th birthday, Jim gave Paul a nickel-plated trumpet. But when the infectious rhythm of rock and roll swept through Radio Luxembourg, Paul traded it in for something cooler, a 15-pound Framus Zenith acoustic guitar. He wanted to sing and play like the stars, but there was one problem. He was left-handed. Inspired by a Slim Whitman poster, he flipped the strings, teaching himself to play the opposite way. That small act of adaptation would shape music history. He quickly found his songwriting voice, his first original tune being I Lost My Little Girl, written on that very Zenith guitar. He followed it up with another composition on the piano, When I'm 64, a cheeky track that wouldn't be released until years later with the Beatles. Paul was falling hard for music, drawing influence from American R&B and idolizing Little Richard. In fact, his first public performance was belting out Long Tall Sally at a Butlin's Holiday Camp talent show. And then came the meeting that would change everything: how the Beatles was formed. Most people can agree that the Beatles are the most famous band in history. In just 7 years, they changed music forever and became the best-selling band of all time. But their path to becoming one of the most famous bands in history was anything but easy. It all began on July 6, 1957, when 15-year-old Paul McCartney met John Lennon at a church fair in Woolton. John was playing with his band, the Quarrymen, mixing folk, jazz, and rock and roll. Paul was impressed by John, and John was impressed by Paul, especially since Paul knew how to tune a guitar and could play songs by Eddie Cochran easily. Soon after, Paul joined the band as a rhythm guitarist. By 1958, George Harrison, Paul's younger friend from school, joined the band as well, taking on the role of the lead guitarist. By 1960, John's friend from art school, Stuart Sutcliffe, joined as the bass player. Trying to find a befitting name, the band went through a few names like Johnny and the Moondogs, the Beatles, and the Silver Beatles, before finally choosing the Beatles in August 1960. With a new name and big dreams, they headed to Hamburg, Germany. There, they played long hours in clubs, learning to perform like professionals. Before their first big gig in Hamburg, they added Pete Best as the drummer. The band was raw, energetic, and determined. By 1961, things took a turn when Stewart decided to leave the band. Rumor has it that he left to chase the woman of his dreams. After Stewart left, Paul took over on bass. Some say he didn't want to at first, but he took the role and helped guide the band's future. While in Hamburg, the band made their first recording, not as the Beatles, but as the Beat Brothers playing backup for singer Tony Sheridan on the song My Bonnie. That recording found its way to Brian Epstein, who at the time managed a local record store. He believed the band had something special, and in January 1962, he became their manager.
That was always in this body, and the body's just grown up.
Sure, the guy behind the eyeballs.
Yeah.
That same year, Pete Best was replaced by Ringo Starr as drummer. By October, their song Love Me Do was on the radio, and it made a big impact. Soon, the UK fell in love with them, and the US followed a year later. And soon, Beatlemania began. But this wasn't just a phase, it became a cultural shift. Paul, often called the cute Beatle, was more than just a pretty face. He and John wrote many of their early hits like I Saw Her Standing There, She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and Can't Buy Me Love. These songs defined a generation. Then in 1965, Paul brought a new song to the studio. It was a quiet ballad called Yesterday. He recorded it alone with just his voice, a guitar, and a string quartet. It was different from anything the Beatles had done before, emotional and personal. Yesterday became one of the most covered songs in history, and it indicated that the Beatles were beginning to explore deeper and more creative music. Behind the scenes, Paul McCartney started taking a bigger role. Music expert Ian MacDonald said it simply, Paul wasn't just writing songs anymore. He was arranging, producing, and quietly leading the band. The creative spotlight was shifting. Even John Lennon noticed. And this shift eventually began to fuel a feud that would turn into the messiest till this very day. The sudden growth brought problems that even recording engineer Norman Smith saw the shift. John and Paul were no longer working as closely as before. Though the Beatles' music was getting better, their teamwork was getting worse. Soon enough, cracks in the group began to show. In 1966, they released Revolver, a bold and clever album that changed what people thought pop music could be. The songs were deeper, the sounds were more unusual. With string sections and psychedelic guitar parts, the Beatles weren't just keeping up with trends, they were setting them. Even before Revolver came out, Paul took the lead with Paperback Writer, followed by 2 more hits where he was front and center. Then came Eleanor Rigby, a song Paul wrote. Producer George Martin arranged it for a string group, no drums, no guitars, just Paul and the strings. Music writer Jonathan Gould called it a neoclassical tour de force. The other Beatles only sang a little in the background. The message was clear. Paul was moving beyond pop music and creating something different. By the end of their 1966 US tour, the Beatles were done performing live. That last concert was the end of their stage career. But Paul kept going. While the others took a break, he wrote the soundtrack for The Family Way, a film. The music was based on 2 short tunes which George Martin turned into 13 versions. The soundtrack didn't sell much, but it won Paul an Ivor Novello Award, a quiet win, but a big sign of what was coming. With no more tours, the band drifted apart. Paul, feeling the distance, came up with a new idea. What if they stopped being the Beatles and became a new band altogether? A fake band. A strange, colorful one with a new name and new style. That idea became Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Paul wanted to show the world that they had changed. They weren't the smiling, clean-cut boys anymore. They were artists. "We were fed up with being the Beatles," Paul said. "We hated that four little mop-top approach. We were not boys, we were men."
Me and John writing together was that I think we wrote just short of 300 songs.
The studio became their playground. By late 1966, the Beatles started recording without any rules. They used tape loops, played solos backward, and even brought in a 40-piece orchestra for a day in the life, with Paul McCartney and producer George Martin taking turns as conductors. Nothing was off limits. In February 1967, they released Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane, two very different songs that showed two sides of the same story. A few months later in June, they dropped the Sgt. Pepper album. The cover, based on one of Paul's sketches, was unforgettable. The band in bright costumes surrounded by a collage of famous faces, designed by pop artists Peter Blake and Jan Hayworth. It was loud, strange, and unlike anything anyone had seen. The Beatles were no longer just a band. They had become something bigger. But then, in August 1967, their manager Brian Epstein died, suddenly leaving the group shocked and unsure of what to do. Paul stepped up and began taking charge, something John Lennon used to do. His first big move was pushing ahead with their idea for a TV film, Magical Mystery Tour. The project was a mess behind the scenes, and the movie itself didn't go over well. Critics didn't like it. Still, the soundtrack told a different story. It was a huge hit, selling $8 million worth of albums in just 3 weeks, more than any other Beatles album at the time. Next came Yellow Submarine, an animated movie based on Paul's fun 1966 song. It came out in July 1968 and was praised for its creative visuals and humor. The soundtrack, though, didn't get the same love. By the end of 1968, things inside the band were getting worse. The White Album took a lot out of them. It was a big double album with all kinds of styles, and it came with serious arguments and tension. Things only got worse during the Let It Be sessions. Paul was upset about how unfocused the band had become since Epstein's death. He often pushed the others to work harder, which didn't sit well. But while the band was struggling, Paul's personal life was blooming. He got married to photographer Linda Eastman in March 1969, and they had their first child, Mary, in August.
I know, but I mean, I was a fan of lots of people, so I kind of get it.
Musically, the Beatles were close to the end. They made one last studio album after George Martin suggested they try to make it feel like one continuous piece. Paul liked the idea and pushed for a more connected musical feel. John wasn't sure at first, but they worked out a compromise. A set of individual songs followed by a medley on side 2. Meanwhile, Lennon secretly left the band in September 1969, but he kept it quiet for business reasons. Tensions between Paul and the others kept rising, especially over their new manager, Alan Klein. Paul didn't trust him. By April 1970, Paul officially announced he was leaving the Beatles. Fans were shocked. Later that year, he filed a lawsuit to formally break up the band. By 1975, a court officially ended the Beatles' partnership, but the breakup didn't end there. Lawsuits and hard feelings continued for years, and the split led to more personal and public fights between the band members, especially between Paul and John. But more on that later on in the video. But while the Beatles were crumbling in the spotlight behind closed doors, Paul was quietly piecing together something far more personal, a new life. Away from the cameras and courtroom drama, he was falling in love, becoming a husband, learning how to be a dad, and trying to find peace after the storm. It wasn't just about starting a new band, it was about rebuilding himself. The documentary. After the Beatles dissolved, Paul went on to create a new band with his wife, Linda. Paul and Linda's first child, Mary McCartney, released a documentary that showed us a more vulnerable side to her father. If These Walls Could Sing is more than a documentary, it's a love letter. Directed by Mary McCartney, the film opens the doors to Abbey Road Studios, not just as a historical monument, but as a deeply personal space. For Mary, Abbey Road wasn't just where legends recorded, it was home. Growing up, she was surrounded by music and memories, unaware at first of the studio's monumental place in history. That changed when she was asked to direct the film and learnt Abbey Road had been around for 90 years. What started as a project quickly became a journey of rediscovery of a place, of a legacy. and of her parents. One photo sparked everything. A 1977 shot of Paul and Linda walking their pony across the famous Abbey Road crosswalk. It brought Mary back to the Wings years and planted the seed for something deeper. As she interviewed people who'd worked at the studio, a clear thread emerged: memories of Linda. Nearly every person spoke of her warmth, her ease, and her humanity. These stories, gentle, generous, and personal, became the heart of the film. Mary's ties to the studio weren't only through Paul and Linda. Abbey Road was family. The staff there had helped raise her and her siblings. It was more than a building. It was a community. The documentary blends the personal with the historic. We see Abbey Road through the eyes of the artist who helped define generations. And at the center of it all is Paul. Sitting down with Mary for an interview, he spoke with unfiltered affection. He talked about how Abbey Road offered safety, creativity, and continuity, a place where artists could simply be. One of the most vivid stories came as Paul recalled the making of A Day in the Life. His eyes lit up describing the orchestra, the chaos, and the idea of building from the lowest to the highest note. At first, the musicians didn't understand what they were being asked to do, but that confusion gave way to one of the Beatles' most iconic moments, and Paul's retelling captures the spark that made it happen. The film also captures the band's earliest Abbey Road sessions, their nerves, their inexperience, and their transformation. What began as uncertainty became mastery. They didn't just use the studio, they owned it. Every inch of Abbey Road became an instrument. Mary also shares glimpses into her life growing up with famous parents who still kept things grounded. She remembers going on tour with Wings, her parents balancing fame with family. That blend of extraordinary and ordinary shaped her, and the film reflects that balance. With appearances from Ringo Starr, Elton John, Noel Gallagher, and Roger Waters, If These Walls Could Sing becomes not just a film about Abbey Road, but a celebration of its soul. And for Mary, it became something else too. A new connection with her father, a more profound understanding of her mother, and a proud first step into filmmaking. Overall, it's not just Abbey Road's story, it's hers, and she tells it with heart. If These Walls Could Sing may have brought Mary closer to her father, helping her see him as more than just a legend. But not everyone shared that gentle view of Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney and John Lennon's feud. The beef between John Lennon and Paul McCartney after the Beatles' breakup is still the most talked about today. Lennon wrote, "How do you sleep?"
And I think the Klein Eastman situation really...
After Paul McCartney's lawsuit in the London High Court to dissolve the Beatles as a legal partnership. That lawsuit came not long after Lennon's blunt Rolling Stone interview in December 1970, where he took shots at the band. McCartney and Linda clapped back with full-page ads in the music press mocking Lennon and Yoko, showing themselves in clown costumes and wrapped in blankets. Some saw it as a jab at Beigism. And when McCartney dropped Rum in May 1971, Lennon felt targeted. Paul later admitted that lines in Too Many People were subtle jabs.
I think we began to feel that we'd done it, and that all we were now going to go into was just do it twice.
Lennon was convinced that Three Legs and other tracks were digs too, though Paul denied it. Lennon's response was How Do You Sleep?, a brutal takedown aimed straight at Paul. The song kicks off with So Sgt. Pepper Took You by Surprise, calling back to the 1967 album. Before that first line, ambient sounds play, echoing the start of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Then there's the line, "Those freaks were right when they said you were dead," a nod to the Wild Paul is dead conspiracy theory. Lennon didn't hold back. He even added, "The only thing you did was yesterday, and since you've gone, you're just another day," referencing two of Paul's most well-known songs, Yesterday and Another Day.
They're crazy, you know, so I'm often with John and just talking about doing something.
Lennon originally wrote a harsher line, "You probably pinched that bitch anyway," referring to how Paul once asked others if he might have accidentally copied the melody of Yesterday. Lennon got the sole credit for How Do You Sleep? But according to Felix Dennis of Oz magazine, Yoko Ono and Alan Klein also helped write the lyrics. While the two did eventually resolve their feud before Lennon's tragic passing in 1980, we can't help but wonder where the Paul is dead theory stemmed from. Paul is dead theory. The theory claimed Paul died in 1966 and was replaced by a look-alike, with the other Beatles leaving clues in album covers and lyrics. It gained traction in 1969, especially on American college campuses, where students combed through songs and visuals for hidden messages. It got so intense that Life magazine featured Paul on their cover with the headline, "Paul is still with us," which calmed the storm. Paul himself later mocked the rumor with his 1993 live album titled Paul is Live. Whispers of Paul's death started in 1966, mostly around Fleet Street, where reporters were calling the Beatles' press officer, Tony Barrow, asking for confirmation. Barrow shut it down, saying he had just spoken to Paul, but the seed was planted. As the Beatles retreated from the public eye and canceled tours, speculation picked up again in 1967.
We put it in the oven and forgot about it, and it came out like a charred.
The rumor escalated to say Paul had died in a car crash on the M1 on January 7th. The Beatles book even had to address it in their February issue. Paul played into the noise later that year, joking about it during the Sgt. Pepper press conference. The secrecy around the band didn't help either. George Martin recalled promoters using decoy Beatles to escape hotels. Journalist Maureen O'Grady said the same trick was used in Baltimore. Soon, fans claimed the entire band had doubles. Paul and George denied it, but the story had momentum. Some claimed Paul had died and been replaced by a look-alike named William Campbell, or Billy Shears, as referenced in Sgt. Pepper. Others blamed MI5 for orchestrating the cover-up to avoid national mourning. By late 1967, the theory was embedded in pop culture. People who knew the Beatles, or claimed to, were saying Paul had been replaced. Some swore they heard it from guests at his engagement party. The obsession with backmasking didn't help either. When Glass Onion dropped on the White Album, Lennon threw more fuel on the fire with "The Walrus was Paul Paul," which he later admitted was just him having fun. Still, fans took it as gospel. Everything exploded on September 17, 1969, when a student newspaper ran, "Is Beatle Paul McCartney dead?" The story broke down supposed clues in the music and artwork. "Turn Me On, Dead Man," from Revolution 9 became a smoking gun. Fans scrutinized album covers, Paul barefoot on Abbey Road, the OPD patch on Sgt. Pepper, and someone in a different suit on Magical Mystery Tour. It was all taken as evidence. Tim Harper, who ran the first piece, said the theory caught fire because of the times. With Vietnam and distrust in authority, people were ready to question everything. The theory offered mystery and rebellion, the perfect mix. At the time Abbey Road dropped, tensions in the band were high. Lennon had told the others he was done. Paul was retreating to his Scottish farm, raising his newborn daughter and avoiding the spotlight. On October 10th, Beatles press officer Derek Taylor made a statement. "We've been getting questions like that for years," he said, "but in the past few weeks it's nonstop." By October 22nd, Paul was still off-grid in Scotland.
You know, I mean, yeah, I know. I think, Ringo was the shy one and the cute one.
His silence only made things worse. With no new public photos or appearances, fans became detectives, building a web of clues from lyrics and visuals. The most popular version of the story was detailed. Paul stormed out of a recording session and into a fatal crash, and the band replaced him to avoid panic. The crash was brutal. Versions said he was decapitated. The remaining Beatles allegedly held a secret funeral and started leaving clues in their music. Blue Jay Way, Don't Pass Me By, and Strawberry Fields Forever were interpreted as emotional tributes. Abbey Road was seen as a funeral procession, Lennon in white, Ringo in black, George in denim, and Paul barefoot and out of step. I Buried Paul at the end of Strawberry Fields was taken as a confession, but Lennon insisted he said cranberry sauce. Revolution 9 played backward became Turn Me On, Dead Man. I'm So Tired, reversed, allegedly said Paul is dead, man, miss him, miss him. On Abbey Road, Paul held a cigarette in his right hand even though he was left-handed. The license plate on the white Beetle read LMW 281F, which people interpreted as 28IF, Paul's age if he had lived. They even tried to make LMW mean Linda McCartney Weeps, even though Paul hadn't met Linda yet. Despite how wild it all sounded, people believed it. On October 21st, the Beatles' office tried to shut it down again. Paul is still very much with us, they said. On October 24th, BBC Radio's Chris Drake got a rare interview with Paul at his Scottish farm. Paul sounded chill and said he was enjoying a quiet life, but the interview didn't stop the noise. CBS News caught Paul looking scruffy and quiet working on the farm. Then Life magazine pulled up. Paul lost his cool, splashed water on photographers, and allegedly swung at one of them. But realizing the PR risk, he calmed down and offered to pose if they gave him the film. They agreed. The cover photo ran on November 7th, showing Paul smiling with Linda and Mary. In the interview, Paul called the theory bloody stupid and explained he was just done with the spotlight for now. That settled it for most people. But by then, the myth had already taken on a life of its own, etched into pop culture forever. Not just a conspiracy theory, but a fascinating what-if that blurred the line between mystery and music. Which Beatles song is your favorite? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this piece, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating stories. And hey, refer to the next video on your screen. You will enjoy it.